The police thought they were responding to a burglary. But what they found inside the abandoned house in Ibadan would shock not only the city, but the entire nation. Shackled men and women crying for help. Skulls. Bones. And whispers of a pastor who promised salvation, but delivered death. This wasn't just another crime. It was a revelation of how power, greed, and blind faith could turn ordinary people into monsters, and innocent souls into victims. This is the story of the Ibadan ritual murders, one of Nigeria's darkest and most chilling true crime cases. Ibadan. A city of contradictions. Known as the largest city in West Africa by landmass, it carries the weight of history, tradition, and modern chaos. Bustling markets, crowded bus stops, and the hum of commerce dominate the streets by day. But at night, whispers spread of something else: ritual killings, human sacrifices, and dark societies hidden in plain sight. In many African societies, the belief in ritual money-making, often called money rituals, is still alive. Stories of people becoming wealthy overnight, allegedly by sacrificing human lives, circulate like folklore. In some communities, people fear that misfortune, sudden disappearances, or mysterious deaths are tied to such practices. This cultural backdrop is what made the case in Ibadan so terrifying and believable. At the center of this story stood Pastor Elijah Adewale, a man in his early 50s. A charismatic preacher. A self-proclaimed prophet. A man who knew how to weave the language of the Bible with the desperation of the people. To the poor and unemployed, he was hope. To desperate youths, he was a promise of wealth and protection. To grieving families, he was a man of prayer who could break curses and bring blessings. But behind the pulpit, Adewale was something else entirely. Witnesses would later describe him as controlling, manipulative, and obsessed with sacrifice. He preached about divine prosperity, a message that if you gave enough, you would receive even more in return. At first, it was money, goats, and chickens. But soon, rumors spread that Pastor Adewale demanded more. Much more. Most of the victims were young men and women in search of opportunities. Some came from small villages across Oyo and Ogun states. They were promised jobs, scholarships, or spiritual breakthroughs. One survivor later said, "He told us to follow him for prayers. We thought it was a retreat. But once we entered the compound, the gates were locked. And that was the beginning of our suffering." These victims weren't faceless. They were sons and daughters. Brothers and sisters. People who believed they were walking into a better life, but instead walked into the jaws of death. It began to unravel on March 22, 2014. Residents of Sokor, a quiet community in Ibadan, had been complaining for weeks. Strange sounds. Cries for help. Some swore they heard chains dragging across the ground. Others dismissed it as the sound of madmen. That morning, a group of locals decided to investigate. Armed with sticks and stones, they entered an abandoned compound hidden behind tall weeds. What they found would haunt them forever. Inside the compound was a house of horror. Several emaciated men and women were chained by the neck and ankles. Some were too weak to speak. Others cried out, "Help us. Don't leave us here." The walls were stained with blood. Dozens of human skulls and bones littered the floors. Fetish objects, talismans, and blood-soaked clothes were piled in corners. The stench of death was unbearable. One eyewitness described it. "We opened one room, and it was full of bones. Skulls everywhere. We couldn't believe it. This was happening in our city." Outside, shallow graves revealed more bodies. Some were freshly buried. Others were already skeletons. It was clear this wasn't just an abandoned house. It was a slaughterhouse. The police were called in immediately. At first, they were overwhelmed by the scene. Officers later admitted they had never encountered anything of this scale before. Survivors were rushed to hospitals. Some were too traumatized to speak. But slowly, their testimonies began to reveal the truth. All fingers pointed to Pastor Elijah Adewale. He was the one who lured them. He promised jobs, money, and miracles. Once inside the compound, they were trapped. Victims claimed they were starved, tortured, and watched as others were taken away, never to return. One survivor recalled, "They would come at night, chanting. They would select someone, and by morning, we never saw them again. We knew they had been killed." Police recovered chains, ropes, and torture devices. Dozens of decomposed corpses. Ledgers with names, dates, and mysterious symbols. Evidence of wealthy clients, businessmen, politicians, and even traditional rulers. The scale of the operation suggested that this was not the work of one man. It was a network. A ritualist syndicate feeding the demand for human parts. When Pastor Adewale was arrested, he appeared calm. In one police interview, he said, "These people came for miracles. I gave them prayers. Whatever happened in that house, I know nothing about it." But survivors told a different story. They claimed he personally led rituals, chanting while victims were killed. Some alleged that he prayed over body parts before they were sold. The investigation also uncovered that the compound had been operating for years, right under the noses of local authorities. How could something so horrific remain hidden for so long? The community had its suspicions: corruption. The case made headlines across Nigeria. The press called it the Ibadan forest of horror. The public was outraged. Protests broke out in Ibadan and beyond. People demanded justice, transparency, and an end to ritual killings. The trial was long and complicated. Many feared that powerful people connected to the case would never face justice. Still, in 2017, Pastor Adewale and two of his accomplices were convicted of murder, kidnapping, and ritual killings. They were sentenced to death by hanging. Others received life imprisonment. But justice felt incomplete. Many believed the true masterminds, wealthy elites who paid for human parts, were never exposed. For the victims' families, closure never came. One grieving mother told a reporter, "I sent my son to Ibadan to find work. He never came home. They used him for money. How can I forgive?" The community of Soko was forever scarred. The compound, once a place of horror, became a site of pilgrimage for activists and journalists. Some locals said they could still hear cries at night. The Ibadan ritual murders remain one of Nigeria's most disturbing crimes. It exposed not just the evil of one man, but the desperation of a society where poverty and greed create fertile ground for exploitation. It revealed the dangers of blind faith and the dark side of ambition. This tragedy reminds us that the search for quick wealth can come at the cost of human life. And that behind promises of prosperity, sometimes the darkest secrets lie waiting.